Sego, Paige Bethmann Youngets. My name is Paige Bethmann. I'm a Haudenosauenee filmmaker. I'm currently here in New York City on Lenape territory, and I'm honored to be back here and speaking with you. It's been, lots to discuss.
Lots to discuss since then. Yeah. And so I'll link to our conversation, I think it's 4 years ago. And then you and Lauren Waters had an Auntie's Emergent. So I feel like you've been part of these conversations and you guys moved through some cohorts together, which was so interesting to watch, really beautiful to watch. And then all of the impact that your film is having in really particular ways. Can you give us more of this background of who you are and then get us into remaining native and catch us up to where we are now, including South by Southwest, which you dominated. No.
Low key, though.
Low key dominated.
Low key.
That's the best kind.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like my love of storytelling definitely stemmed from my grandmother, who is a traditional Mohawk storyteller. And, growing up, I was always very captivated by the way that she told stories and, bringing them to life and always acknowledging that, her stories never came from books, but were really much of, the oral tradition of being passed down. And I just love the worlds that she built. And I also think it's not so much about the color or the detail, but even just like the connection to people and the way that she would interact with, the kids that she would do storytelling with and inviting them in and allowing that participation. Yeah, it was always something that really moved me growing up, and it was always something I was excited for. And then I think, throughout, learning and getting to know my own interests and, always kind of gravitating towards a camera. I would always try to make videos instead of write essays at school. And, I was someone who took all my stuffed animals and like put them around my house and pretended to be Steve Irwin and like, would film like a TV show. And, that footage, no one will find that. But
I was going to say, I think you need to bring it out. It's time.
Yeah. But, I think when it came time to start thinking of, what I want to do, I definitely felt like that was where I was heading, which was with film and television. And I went to Ithaca College and pursued a degree in film and television. And it was interesting, Ithaca College. It was a great place, very strong network of filmmakers and folks. But I did feel a little bit isolated there, being an Indigenous person, which is kind of strange because it's like Cayuga territory and
Totally Haudenosaunee territory.
yeah, and just kind of, there wasn't really much there, like, sharing or seeing that, like, even, um, just, like, the presence of it either. Yeah, it was a little difficult to navigate, and I think some of the projects that I was doing at school were always sort of, like, geared more towards the Western framework of production, so it's, like, a lot of, learning broadcast TV, learning how to shoot commercials, learning, music videos and things, and yeah, I think when I left Ithaca, I had done some interesting programs. One at the Sochi Olympics, where I went to Russia for a month and a half.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was working with NBC as an intern,
Oh my God,
which
awesome.
was my dream come true because I grew up figure skating, and yeah.
Also, did not know. Okay.
but but yeah, and then I went from there to working in New York City and living in New York City and working in a very commercial background. So working in advertising, I worked for brands like Louis Vuitton and Moet and also Vlasic Pickles, which is really random. And I was an agency life and then kind of feeling like I wanted to work somewhere on a more editorial, like news side because I just wanted my work to have some more substance.
Then
But then I got
pickles?
and pickles.
Then they're so
Um,
nourishing. Yeah.
good electrolytes in pickles, though,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know? But, yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying I found my
Mm.
way to, working at Vox, Media, which I was there for over, 6 years, and really understanding, how to do like nonfiction storytelling and like, pull a crew together and to be on a series and to talk to clients and have like a really robust experience around production. But I think it wasn't until remaining native that really was able to blend two skill sets of like one of this like how do we actually do this, from a production standpoint, but also one that I fully supported and believed in and had like the total creative autonomy to decide. And then even within the infrastructure itself to really cultivate a team and a way of being and really leaning on more community practice to make sure that the ecosystem was less toxic than what I've learned in West.
Right?
Yeah. um, so,
And
so
people
yeah,
say that's impossible. Like,
right,
you're
right.
so naive, right?
And time is money, baby. You
Time
can't
is money.
extra, time to eat dinner with somebody
Right.
and that,
Feed your crew.
right, no time for that.
Yeah. Didn't you propose the story of Stevens to Vox, and they were just, like, illegible, right?
Yeah, yeah. It was like a couple of things. Like this story couldn't sustain a feature, or it's not necessarily relevant, or it's like, just language like that. But honestly, it was a blessing because I think, look at where we are now, and just the way in which the film was made. I think it couldn't have been able to hold on to the structure and hold on to the things I chose to prioritize without that sort of freedom as a storyteller. So,
Yeah, how did you know that you could, like, even behind the scenes, things could be different? How did you was that just inherent in your way because you were in those spaces that was just, time is money? And is there a way to articulate how that developed as a seed of an idea and an understanding?
I think I've been talking about this a little bit now, which is sort of like at the end of the day, like no one was asking me to do this. you know, like I wasn't reporting to anybody. No one was banging down my door being like, when is it going to be done? And so I think that almost like allowed the sort of like freedom to emerge where it's like I have control to sort of lead my own path when it comes to this film and kind of takes the pressure off in a sense of like, this is all happening because of me and like
Yeah.
and the people around me that are believing in me and coming on to work together. And so I think like understanding that if anything's gonna happen with the film, I just wanna make sure that the experience is, like, just as valuable as what the product is, and so I think to be able to, cultivate a team and to be able to, like, decide on our own terms how we wanna work, of course, there are real logistical challenges but then when you don't have any resources, you're kind of like, "Well, I guess this is, like" it's almost freeing in another end, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you're
Yes.
already operating in a different way because you're not having that
Mhm.
institutional support.
That's
Um,
right. Well,
yeah.
and even this massive decision to move out there, and to me, that speaks to keeping yourself accountable to the community. Can you talk about the story that you've covered in Remaining Native in this amazing film? And then how that relationship with you just basically cold called the family, didn't you? Isn't that how that works?
Yeah, basically. So
Yeah.
it was 2021 and that was when the news was coming out of the unmarked graves in Kamloops, Canada. And I think for me it brought up a lot of feelings from stories that, my grandmother would share about her mother's experience in boarding school. And, that the harm and the struggle that it was to be in her position years later where she was working on regaining a lot of things that had been lost. And she worked so hard to make sure that my brother and I were always proud of our identities, always showing up and being a part of the community, and just restating that what her family had to go through like wasn't just for us to like not engage. And I think
Yeah.
right before that I had lost my grandmother. And so when the news was coming out, and I was just kind of remembering a lot of her teachings and just thinking about what she shared with me, and also seeing the response from my own community. And then also seeing people who are like, this never happened, or
Yeah.
like, that was just in Canada. I was just a lot of emotions. And then a friend of mine, Michael Galvin, who's the site director at Ganondagan, sent me this article. He's Paiute, and he shared this.
Oh, I didn't realize
Yeah.
that. Okay.
And so he shared this article that was written about Ku, and he's a 17-year-old runner, and he wanted to retrace his great grandfather's 50-mile escape from boarding school that he did when he was 8 years old. And just reading that and just understanding this, story and the visual of this little kid having to navigate such a terrible, like terrifying landscape was one thing, but it was really about who is this 17-year-old self-aware kid who's like choosing to do something to honor his family's story. And I just thought about my own um, skill sets and like being like, well, what am I doing today that's going to honor this history that exists in my family? And
Yeah.
so my first, instinct was like, well, I know how to do film and like I can tell a story. And so, yeah, I did cold call. I reached out to his mom on Facebook, like any good native storyteller, and I sent.
I know Facebook. We were just talking about
Yeah,
Facebook yesterday. Don't ever
well,
leave.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know. I hate Meta, but this is where
I know. All the
everyone's at.
Indian country lives there.
Yeah, but yeah, I shared with his mom, like, my background, why that I was interested in documenting the run, and, if I could have permission to do so, and just like the reasons of why this story spoke to me. And, she ended up, telling that with her family, and, coming back to me saying, yes, you can come out here. And then we all had a phone call. It was like Ku's parents, Ku, and just sharing and just seeing how many synergies there were between what they were trying to do, which was really like bring the community together and, use the story to help create spaces for healing and to be able to like, raise awareness and do it in a
Mhm.
way where you're coming together and you're moving and you're kind of tapping into this energy on a physical level.
And this in itself is so different from the way films generally get made, right? To involve a whole family, I think directors and producers that have been doing it for a long time would be like, that's not possible, you know? And, Francis Ford Coppola, during the making of Apocalypse Now, said, this is the last great dictatorship. They were having heart attacks on set, and there was like a coup, and all this behind the scenes violence that was happening, and then they went way over budget, and things were blowing up, and they were taking the helicopter. Like such a different approach to include the family in how that framework was gonna happen and what the intention was. So I think that's really ceremonial, is setting that intention to be useful to the community, to wrap the community in wholeness.
Yeah.
And there really is this habit of people taking our stories and being trauma porn. And I would say there are a few movies that are out, that came out recently that really bend in that direction.
Mm.
And I really I mean, most movies are like that. I was on the phone with a language partner friend of mine, and he was like, "What are some movies that are not just I'm tearing me up, just totally?" And it's not that we're avoiding the pain. What I see in Remaining Native is that you involve the whole community in wrapping, and that's what a quadrille is. That's what family is.
Mhm.
Like you're wrapped. There's some kind of like wrapping around a fire, and what a beautiful way to just start the entire thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then that continued right throughout the production.
Yeah, it's like to be able to create a relationship, like you have to, and to have that level of trust, it's like you have to be just as vulnerable like as they are being for you in front of the camera. You have to do the same behind the camera, and to be able to create a dialogue of transparency, of multiple touch points of consent, just because they said yes once doesn't mean like all the other things you want to be doing, filming, like is going to be cool, you know? So to be able to establish, protocol and to be able to create a groundwork and foundation of trust because, production moves at the speed of trust and to be able to like do this in the right way required a lot, on our part as like as being open and just being able to be comfortable with saying that you don't have all the answers. I can't promise them that this is the structure and this is how it's going to go, but like to be very vocal in saying, here are my thoughts, here are my concerns, here's like what we're thinking, and really involving them throughout all those stages. So, yeah, after we went out and filmed the Remembrance Run, which was like, over the weekend, we got to really understand like just the power of what they were doing in
Yeah.
that space and act physically being there and physically participating in the run itself and seeing Ku sort of navigate that and understand more about his story about being a young athlete. He wanted to go to a big D1 school and had no coach, no support. And to see that he was going to be entering his senior year of high school without having a plan, really to like how he was going to be able to be recruited.
Wow.
um yeah, it was really for me this kind of opening of like, wow, like if I'm going to really get to know him and understand what that experience is like for him as a young person today who's like affected by this story in this pivotal moment of his, next phase as a young man, then I need to be here. And so I moved from New York to Reno, where I was living the last 3.5 years, to be able to have this relationship and to keep building on this foundation. Because at the end of the day, I didn't want to be someone who just like came in and came out and like
Right.
would have to one start over each time, but also like I wanted to demonstrate my commitment to his family, his community, to get to understand the land. Like, how am I supposed to
Mhm.
have land be in this story without being there for all 4 seasons and without understanding the stories of how their people, harvested pine nuts and buckberries and, where they hunted and just understand how much land plays a role in this story, as most of our stories do. A lot of our stories come from the land itself. So to be able to like take that time and take that on as a responsibility was really important.
Wow. And just noting that that too is ceremonial. That's what we're doing when we're doing the Ohanda Garawadekwa. We're acknowledging the natural world and taking note of it and looking around and where are the bees? Giving thanks for what they do, but like, oh, what if they're not there? It's like scientific accounting as well. That's a very ceremonial thing to be doing, is taking account of that. And his great grandfather was 9 years old, was he not?
8.
He was 8 when he first did
Mhm.
that. So he was 8 years old when he, as can you describe that?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
so Frank Quinn, Ku's great grandfather, was 8 years old when he was taken and brought to the Stewart Indian Boarding School, which is in Carson City, Nevada, around 50 miles from the reservation. And, that school was under the same principle of the United States policy of forced assimilation, the coined term, kill the Indian, save the man. And that school was being federally funded. And it was also in operation for 90 years, the Stewart Indian School, which is really crazy in itself. But Ku's great grandfather, he ran away not just one time, but 3 times, um, you know, to make that journey through the desert. You can only imagine like what that was like if it was dark and cold, if it was hot in the summertime, to be able to do that, and keep doing that repeatedly until, you're able to stay home. It was just
Because they
a
kept
really
coming and
hard
taking him
story.
back, right?
Yeah.
And then
Hmm.
finally they were just like,
Yeah, I guess, we'll let him go. But
we'll let him go. Wow.
mhm.
Oh my gosh. And to hold that within the family, within Ku's family, as you said, like he's a rising track star going into university. And that's the journey that they as a community took back, correct? Back to the school. It's such a highlight of the movie when Ku is leading the whole community back to the school, and it's I get emotional. It's reclaiming, they're physically going over, embodying. It's not just, clicking on phones or what, watching a screen. You're watching them embody that journey. Can you talk about the scope of that and how that was to film and just that moment for the entire community?
The run happened when we were filming 3 times, and so the first time when I went out there, it was actually running from the school back to the reservation, similar to what Frank did. And I think that was like the first time where everyone gathered and came together, and it was like a little bit. I think for Ku, it was sort of it was really important for him, but I don't think he quite understood what his role as a leader was in that run, because Ku was kind of running it as a, like, checking his splits and like running ahead. And, he
Yeah.
finished around like 30 minutes before everybody else the first year when he made it back. And it was really
Wow.
him, doing it with himself. And I think, we chose to focus the film on the second year's run because I think there was a lot of growth that Ku experienced as a young man, and he was truly leading his community. And, it was all about accountability. So running from the reservation back to the school was like reclaiming this journey and also to demand accountability from the people who are responsible. And so the second run had, the two Nevada senators, the
Oh,
governor of Nevada was there, tribal leadership was there. We also paid respects to the children at the cemetery that year, where we brought tobacco ties that we carried as prayer and messages, like to be able to give to those graves. And then the third year, it was the same from the res back to the school, but that run we didn't we don't we I filmed it, but I filmed it purely just for texture. So like filming like dust and heat
yep.
and the landscape, and just really not focusing on Ku anymore, but like really just like trying to get, the textural elements. But
Mm,
the way that we made the decision in the film was, there's like, there's truth and then there's story truth, and how we're able to like create the narrative around the experience that Ku has had himself. So really understanding that how he felt the second year was like, really transformative for him as he like took on this role, him, leading his people, speaking on the stage, all of the things that
yeah.
you see in the film was so powerful and just really yeah, it felt really significant to be able to share that.
It's just all that metaphor, but also embodiment of taking back that land that Frank so amazingly and that's about knowing your land, right? That an 8-year-old can know their land so well that they can make it 50 miles and survive
Yeah.
and then do it 2 more times, like
Right. And that's something I think people miss sometimes, where they're like, oh my, like, yes, of course, it's terrifying. It's scary how difficult that would have been. But also understanding that, like, relationship to land, then was so a part of everyday life, where
yeah,
like he knew like where they would go pine nut picking and the elevation where they could, get resources and food, or where the creeks were and where the buckberries grew, like like, and so there was like an inherent trust in the land that existed between, someone so even so young to still be able to like figure it out. It's
yeah.
amazing.
Well, another beautiful thing too is we were at Pathways at the same time, like concurrent with Indian Market, and Misty, his mother, was there, and she's been organizing the concurrent runs, correct? So,
Mhm.
can you talk about that embodiment part and what that does as far as like, why did you choose that as that's like an impact campaign, correct? Like, or some,
Yeah.
what does that do? Why did you make those choices? Obviously, it's running. What does that do for the film and for the understanding of the film and relationships around the film?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to impact, I always viewed impact as like something that isn't just like an afterthought. It's like, what is the intention of why we're like again, like what foundation are we building to like why we're doing something in the first place. So like I always wanted to make sure that, I had like a North Star or guiding like light to be able to say like if anything, this film needs to be able to do this and needs to be able to like create spaces that we can just be Indigenous people, or and whether that's through running or talk circle or sharing food or any sort of purpose, that we're creating these spaces to have like intentional dialogue around what it means to be Indigenous with this history, that where a lot of us are attached to. Unfortunately, we started conversations really early on with the Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition because as like a organization, they're the ones who are advocating for truth and healing and survivors and descendants of boarding schools. And if they didn't believe that my film was in service of that, then I wouldn't do it because why would I do something that they're doing every day that wasn't going to be a tool? And so thinking of
Mhm.
the film as a tool and thinking of it as one prong of a multi-layered approach,
Yeah.
the film isn't a way to have dialogue, but so is education, so is movement, so is, these language revitalization programs. Like these are all in conversation with one another. We just wanted to be able to, one, have like a touch point for people to actually physically involve themselves in what even like an ounce of the Remembrance Run was like, which is to gather with intention, to go on a run, to think about this land differently, to think about what it would be like to run for your life, even, and to offer that. And, you know, these runs originally were like, we're going to run to each festival. We're gonna like, who's gonna physically, we're gonna like to host these runs, and we're like, okay, that's never gonna happen. That's a little ridiculous.
It's an
But we started,
idea. It's a
yeah, we
seed,
started
right? Yeah.
thinking of like these 5K runs in
Yeah.
conjunction with our screenings. And what's been so amazing is like Misty, through her work, she reached out to, whenever we had a screening, we would reach out to every Indigenous community that's in the area, every organization, every student, Native student group, and colleges or universities. And then we'd reach out to every run club and every running organization. And just because of that invitation to engage with our film, people started being like, yeah, we'll organize a run with you. We'll be your partner. We'll bring, at South by Southwest, we had the Austin Powwow Committee come and they like did dance performance at the end of the run. They brought an Indian taco truck, and we had Nike like, helping us do the running component. So it was like converging a space where like people maybe had no introduction to this, story or this history, or even Native people in general,
Yeah.
had an opportunity to come experience this run and engage directly with local organization that's there where they are. So to be able to do that, we did, 25 runs last year, and with our screenings, and it's so cool because
It's
it's
so
like,
cool.
because they looked as big as, something like South by Southwest, where we had over 300 people turn
Oh
out
my
for that event,
god.
to like doing a run in Sydney, Australia with a bunch of, First Nations kids who just ran a 4 block radius, and that was it, but it was like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what it looks like. It matters like that we showed up and we were able to talk about it and move our bodies together in a way that can access, these sort of ancestral like muscle memories that all of us contain.
I'm crying. Seriously, it makes me so emotional. I'm so emotional right now. Well, and just your ability to make these partnerships. Again, you're not the director that's a dictator. You are someone, and I really started noticing that you were t not so I mean, I'm sure it didn't feel like you were taking your time, but, you were very consciously and methodically moving through these layers, this whole constellation of people that you ended up working with, and can you talk about the cohort that you worked with that seemed fairly new to me, these indigenous cohorts that are moving together to not be in competition, but to be convivial and to for your films to boost each other up. What a concept, you
Yeah,
know?
right? Wouldn't that
Yeah,
be great? And
yeah.
just like, oh man, I was so lucky actually, like to have support like that from before I finished the film with like the Fourth World Media Lab, which was a cohort started by Tracy Rector, and she this is like I think they're on year 10 or something of these cohorts existed, but it was to be able to engage with other Indigenous filmmakers throughout while we're in process of creating our work, and that to me was so important because like you don't have many opportunities to like have peers, especially
Yeah,
Indigenous peers when you're in a process that's really isolating, and to be able to
totally.
like gather and to share
Especially out
and
in Reno, like, you're so
yeah,
far
to
away
have be
from
in
industry,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
right, to be in Reno, but also because
Mhm.
we would gather at different film festivals, and so it
Yeah.
was like we had the support of our, you know, cohort, and then we could also, like, get our feet wet in the industry space, but I think for me, it was like I was getting a lot of, like, feedback from as the film got more support, so does comes in the noise of some people, like, being like, I think you should do this, or I think you should do that, or like this is how you're gonna make it, or this is where you should submit it, and like, which is like you're grateful because you want to have mentorship from people who have experience, right? But at some point, it just turns into like a pizza with everyone's toppings that you don't like, and you're just like, this is a terrible pizza. I don't want to eat this. But to be
Yeah.
able to have that support from an Indigenous cohort, they were able to be like, well, what do you want? And like, what do you like? Why do you feel like you have to explain? This person is like a British dude who like doesn't know like anything about the boarding school. So why are you trying to cater your film to him? It's like learning how to, stay grounded in that truth and to like have other people being like, yeah, like that you're doing what is instinct, and it's okay if it looks a little bit different from what other people have seen before. And that really was so helpful, and it's incredible, and also like to relate on some of the material because like it was so heavy to go through that archival material in the film and to be constantly just in that and to have like other people who could relate and ideas around how do we take care of the community care and like how are we incorporating like traditional practices in our process. So like, Ku's father held, sweat ceremony for us like several times like
Wow.
throughout the year while we were making the film to make sure that, we were okay. Cause, Delmar was like, he always said to me, like, you move way faster than your spirit does. And so you need to find time to like, get your spirit back in your body and like he's like, "You're doing all this traveling, when are you gonna let your spirit catch up to you?" It was really nice to be able to have that help and, to connect in that way, and also just so special to be able to do that with his family, and to
Exactly, to have
have
that
that.
kind of embedded into the film, my gosh. Like, every
Yeah.
level of this is groundbreaking and yet not, it's our tradition as well.
Yeah, it's just like being like how we've survived, right?
Yeah, we're still
It's
here
like
for some
yeah, it's like
reason, and I think this
these
would be the reason.
yeah,
Yeah.
these sort of like levels of being a community. And so we hadn't even like premiered the film yet, and we got invited to be a part of this cohort through Doc Society's Indigenous Impact Alliance, which was a new pilot initiative which paired, five Indigenous films together and to have a strategic goal to eliminate this idea that there can only be one Native film, to invite communities in to decide how they want to screen the films and to be able to make it accessible. And so we were able to like for like a 4-month period be on a platform kinema where like communities could have their host their own community screenings and be able to not just see my film but to see like their films, and we were all like bolstering and sharing and celebrating each other's work, and the impact that it had was so amazing. Like we hosted like 200 community screenings all
Yeah.
across Indian country, and many communities hosted all 5 films, and that was incredible. And we were able to like see that these themes around narrative sovereignty, around land, like around climate, around healing and truth and accountability, like these were all present in our films. So yeah, it was really really amazing to be able to have that and see that as a new form because even when the film premiered and now we're like a year later since our world premiere at South by Southwest,
Yeah.
um, to see that, like, we don't have distribution for the film right now, but even just the idea that it can be done a different way, that, like, well, like,
Yes.
how we're doing these runs, how we're doing these community screenings is distribution.
It is
You know,
distribution.
it's makes me
Yes.
feel a lot more at ease with, like, where we're at right now because it's like,
Yeah.
well, we are doing the things that we, like, said we were gonna do, and, we're bringing it to the communities that who want it.
I just downloaded that document, and again, for my PhD, I mean, it's in my, Zotero, and I'm gonna be using that to because again, I keep using the word groundbreaking about it. It truly is. And I was in Hawaii a couple of years ago, and some friends saw the Vest movie there, and they were like, I really wanna share this with other people, Native Hawaiians, but they said, "I wanna know exactly what you wanna say." They were so careful about what the intent was, and then how do you have those conversations, and they came up with the term spiritual distribution, and it's been with me ever since, and then
Wow.
when this impact campaign came out with you guys, I was like, "That's what that is. That's exactly
Mhm.
what that is." And this distribution, you lose control often of the film, and it's out there without you being able to be in relationship, so you have to be super, super careful about whose hands it goes in and the way that it's framed, right?
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
that's why we're really excited this year because we've been working on like another phase of our impact campaign, which is how do we equip these organizations who have these networks into community that can use the film as a tool, like should they want to. So we are forming a partnership with Wings of America, which is the Native American running organization that does youth running camps. They also train athletes to compete at a national competition. Who was a part of their nationals team in 2022, and now we're working with them to have the film screen at their youth camps. We're also doing some really exciting programming where we can bring a youth camp to a community with the film, and so they can facilitate, you know, a running camp for kids and also train people to keep that in their own community like moving forward without that. So I think it's cool to be able to use it as one prong approach because like yes we want our youth to like be engaging with movement and also like how many running
Yeah.
histories each community has, like there's
Yes.
so many stories and reasons of why our people were runners, and just like even to cultivate some of that history wherever we can go with the film too is really cool to tie it locally, right, to like not just speak about one place but see how it can foster these stories to come out in other communities as well.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. And so, uh, has Ku graduated?
No, Ku is a senior. He's gonna be staying another year because he has eligibility. And also,
Okay. Yeah.
so he's no longer at Oregon. Uh,
Yeah. I thought I heard that
yeah,
he moved. Yeah.
he transferred to Washington State University in Pullman,
Mhm.
Washington. But he is doing so well, and like
Awesome.
he just ran a sub 4 mile like a couple weeks ago, which is just like insane.
Yeah.
Um,
What?
yeah, yeah,
Like,
it's insane, like, I don't even know, yeah, I can't even bike that fast, and
serious?
yeah,
Wow.
and he's studying art and anthropology, and he's really interested in perhaps even getting a degree in, like, a pre-law or a politics degree, and thinking about, ways in which he can continue to advocate for his community. And this year in August, the Remembrance Run is coming back. And so it is going to be open to community to participate. So it's going to be August 14th to the 16th. We have a website, there's a
Oh.
registration link if you want to register and come out and run with us over that weekend.
Ooh, super cool.
Yeah. So we're excited about that.
Well, and Standing Rock 10-year anniversary is happening right around that very same time. Wouldn't
Oh,
that be
yeah.
cool to be like, "Bing bop."
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, nice. That's a good thing for people to know. This might be taking a couple steps back, but this understanding of like your role as director. So, not dictator, director. Do you end up being, I think people who maybe aren't in our communities or don't understand this kind of the sharing of this power, and even at Pathways, what I notice is that you stepped aside and Misty spoke, and the power of that. And the film really speaks for itself.
Mhm.
It really has so much strength within the film. And then Misty spoke, and this sharing of spotlight and power, a different kind of power. And does it end up that that you're a psychologist in those situations with your crew and with the community? I mean, it just seems like such a huge responsibility. How would you say you manage that? I'm glad the sweats were there. Does it become too much on your shoulders at any given point, and how do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that as a director, you do hold a lot. It's you who's the reason why everyone's showing up to work on a project. It's like I brought on these collaborators, and my role and responsibility is to care for that environment and to make sure that people feel, just a part of it as I do. I will say though, it's like, with in terms of like the spotlight, um, like I love when I'm able to like bring up my collaborators, like, and to have them speak about their experiences. Like we just did something here in New York a couple days ago with my composer Kina Banali came out to New York, and we did a workshop about the music and about the score, and just to like speak to that component, because yes, my job is to like guide the visual and creative direction of the film, but it's everyone who came along for that ride that is actually the ones doing it.
Yep.
So it's like they for them to speak about that is a gift, for me, and I'm just so grateful to everyone who has like been able to like to believe in me and to like help create protect the space for me to create. And too,
Mhm.
my producer Jessica Epstein is amazing.
Mhm.
She's really held the fort down when it came to like creating a safe environment for people, and to like even for me, it's like to be able to have her help me share that load of the archival. She's not as attached to that history as I am. She's a non-native person, and so for her to take on that lift of even just like labeling and archiving and being able to sort through it first, so then it takes off the pressure from me to like have to sit in all of it, is really amazing to have that. And I think when it came to our screenings, it can be a lot. At the end of a screening, people
Yeah.
come up and they want to share, and it's amazing to be able to feel that like you created this dialogue. But when you're having elders share their personal experiences of their stories, and like, it's kind of like I'm so grateful that you're sharing with me, and now where do I put it?
That's
Like
right.
how do I protect my own self, and have space to process. And I think that's been why, having Ku's father, who's a counselor, he's a counselor and a health support person. He now works as we like through our like work with NABS, he got hired by them to be a health support counselor for their oral history project. So he goes around and he helps with decompression with elders who share their stories. And so we've been having him a part of our screenings to be able to provide that service, to people who need a place to talk or to have that dialogue. So that's incredible to like think about those spaces and those resources to be a part of the process as well, and not like an afterthought, because the last thing I want to do is like have someone become re-traumatized or to like feel like they don't have a safe space to like reground themselves after a screening. And I think a big role as a director is to find the people that you can rely on, and you can um, bring in to support these different factors that exist when you have a film. And so I'm just really grateful for that.
Yeah, it's so different from an extractive way of storytelling where it's like, I got to make 5 films in 3 years. And, that's not what you're doing. It just keeps circling back and expanding in a 3D kind of way as
Yeah.
well. and that you have the capacity to both see that. I think, again, somebody used this word legible the other day. You're making that legible
Mhm.
because that kind of work is illegible to like mainstream
Yeah.
media. So that I'm so
Yeah.
grateful for that. Yeah.
I do think that there needs to be, you know, like, how do we make it more sustainable? Because I don't wanna abandon, like, my process of, like, it's the reasons why I moved to Nevada. It's the reasons why, I invite community into our screenings, and, like, I don't wanna be in a position where I'm like, "Alright, play the film, bye," and, like, running away again, It's like, how do I leave people with, like, a place to turn to, or, like, a space to be able to process in a good way, or like even just having a website where people can go back through and learn more is helpful. But like, I'm a filmmaker and I want to tell more stories, and I want to be able to like, do other projects. So it's figuring out how do we create a sustainable um, process where I can, make set up the film in a way that it can take its own journey, without me being so attached to it. And that's a
Yes.
little bit nerve-wracking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And this process of inventing and creating and carrying that on. Yeah, I can see. I don't really like it when people say, "What are you working on now?" Because it's like, is it not enough? But I'm just gonna open if there's anything that you want to talk about as we're wrapping up, you just give us so much to think about and so much to apply directly. Like it's possible. It's not a naive thought that you can work in ceremonial ways
Yeah.
and using our teachings. So is there anything you want to tell us?
Last year it was the most like amazing, incredible, powerful experiences that I've ever had and journeys that I've been on. And I think I'm still very much processing that. And so the ways in which I like to process that is by being home and like being in my own community, and to do things that do provide me a regrounding so I can be able to see clearly and to be able to bring intention to the next work that I do. And so, I got to go home and go up to midwinter ceremony for a day, like, this year. And I got to spend time with my baby nephew, and I took a cradle board making class. And like, yeah, there are some things in the works, but some things that, are just still marinating.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, you rock. And, thank you for this articulation and legibility and just the heart that you're bringing, because the industry is upside down. That traditional industry is basically gone at this point. And thank goodness you are making another version of it that is not gone. And that means so much to our communities. And you take that responsibility on. And I just can't wait to see what happens next. And yeah. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
What's going to do? Yeah. You
That
rock,
means a
lady.
lot. Thank you.